We are live. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the April 22nd Litchfield Budget Committee meeting. I'm going to call the meeting to order, and we'll kick it off tonight with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Right. A cold Thursday, right? Winter has returned. I saw snowflakes today. Hopefully everyone was staying warm. Tonight's agenda, we have public input to start us off. I know we have a couple of people, I see Ms. Burke and Mr. Taylor here. Any public input this evening?
Oh, Ms. Burke,
Ms. Burke?
I have something. I'm not sure. My audio is a little tough right now.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening. Jen Burke, 1 Westview Drive. I'm here tonight to discuss the process for filling the Budget Committee seat vacated by Ms. Forty. For those who may not know, I served on the Budget Committee from 2016 until September 2020, where I had to resign my position due to an overwhelming workload. In the spring and summer of 2016, the Budget Committee drafted and adopted bylaws by which this committee would operate. Mr. Cutter, Ms. Douglas, and myself were all members of the committee at that time and were a part of the discussion. Since adopting these bylaws, every vacancy has been filled by a combination of advising the next highest receiver of votes, if applicable, and also posting the position publicly. Every position has been filled this way. I shared with the committee a correspondence earlier this week outlining the fact that I had contacted Mr. Cutter immediately upon being made aware of Ms. Forty's pending departure, where I stated my interest in the position. In your March meeting, Mr. Cutter advised he would be reaching out to Mr. Taylor and would be posting publicly for interested parties to apply. The latter never happened. Also, I think it's important to note that while Mr. Taylor did in fact run for the Budget Committee, he did not run for that specific seat. There is no next highest vote receiver in Ms. Forty's election as she ran unopposed. I'm here tonight to ask why. Why was there a change in direction to what has been the practice since 2016? Why was the position not posted? Why was the town involved and the attorney contacted? And what specifically was discussed? Why are you not looking for additional qualified candidates? When this was reviewed in September for my vacancy, Mr. Cutter clearly outlined that he would be contacting Mr. Taylor and posting. He followed through with that in September. Why not now? What has changed? Because this is public input, I know you don't have to answer my questions, but I really ask that the other members of the committee ask these questions. Please do the right thing. Do not vote tonight to appoint or not appoint Mr. Taylor. Please post the position, interview any applicants at your next meeting, and then vote. You very well may end up in the same outcome, but you'd be following the process that has been established for the last 5 years. In my opinion, this committee owes the public following through on Mr. Cutter's statement from your last meeting and posting this publicly. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And we do have an agenda item for the open position appointment, which we'll get into details about this. Thank you, John. Appreciate that. Mr. Taylor?
Scott Taylor, 6 Lilac Court. Just here today to express my interest in the open position. Does go to vote and is available. I'd like you to please consider me. Over the last term, based on 100% attendance, I think very active participation, as many of the members will probably attest to, and the feedback that I've received from many departments around the professionalism about how I go ahead and do ask questions about the budget. I think I'm well suited, but when that time comes that you folks are ready to vote, I would just like to be considered. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Okay. Anybody else from the public? I see a 603 number. I don't know. Perhaps that's Bob Leary.
It is.
All right. Welcome, Bob.
Hello. Hey.
All right. So moving into review, additions, changes to tonight's agenda. Any committee members have any changes this evening? I have one I'd like to add. I'm going to add after the second public input. I'm actually going to move into a non-public session tonight under RSA 91A 32 AC. Okay. Correspondence. So I know at our last committee meeting, I actually intended to present correspondence for the past couple of months. I failed to do that in kind of the mix of chair and vice chair nominations. My apology. I do have a running list of correspondence that we've received from January through present. John David's going to share that on the WebEx. I'm having technical issues with my computer, so I'm going to read it off the TV screen.
Actually just got booted out.
Of course you did.
Just 1 second.
Give it just a minute to load.
Technology never fails. Sorry about that, Mr. Brunel.
Maybe while you load that, we'll move into the minutes and then come back. That work? Okay, great. So the next up on the agenda is the March 25th minutes, which I know were circulated to the committee. I didn't see any modifications or edits to those minutes from any committee members. Any thoughts or are there any motions?
Motion to approve the minutes of March 25th.
We have a motion. Is there a second, please?
I'll second.
Have a
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Douglas and a second by Ms. Harrison. Further conversation? Hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote. We'll start with Ms. Harrison, please. Mr. Sun,
Yes.
Ms. Douglas.
Yes.
I am a yes. And on the line, we have Ms. Stevens,
Yes.
Mr. Hayes,
Yes.
Mr. Barca,
Yes.
and Mr. Leary.
Yes.
All right, so the minutes are passed by a vote of 8-0-0. Excellent. All right, and I see Mr. Sun has brought up the correspondence. So again, I did put a running list of lots of correspondence here. And this dates back to the January through present. And so we had edits to our January 7th minutes on January 19th. On January 20th, we had the review of town warrant articles. On the 21st and 22nd, there was some email exchange on signatures for the school and town MS7 forms in preparation for filing. On January 22nd, we had the town budget report. On January 25th, the 119 minutes were circulated to the budget committee. On January 27th, we had school deliberative planning from the moderator. On January 29th, we had deliberative preparation with the superintendent's office. On January 29th, we also received the town budget report. On January 30th, we had edits that were circulated on the January 14th, 21 minutes that were posted. Into February, we had updated materials for deliberative presentations. We had on 2/5, we had the town budget report, as well as on 2/12 and 2/19, the town budget report. Also on the 19th, we had some email exchange on combined deliberative sessions and what the process was going to be for this upcoming year and how did it work this year, and just, trying to think about best practices and what worked and what didn't work. No final decisions on that, so more to come. On February 26th, we had the town budget report, and then shifting into March. March 5th, town budget report. March 10th, we had an email from Mrs. Burke expressing interest in the open budget committee position, given the resignation of Ms. Forty. That did come in. On January 12th, we had the town budget report. January 19th, town budget report. On March 12th and March 19th. On March 22nd, we had the budget committee request for the school information, the BA report, as well as expense report. And then on March 25th, that was sent. The BA report was sent from the SAU and forwarded to the committee. On March 26th, we had the distribution of draft budget committee meeting calendar. So I circulated that to both the town and the school. On March 26th, we had the coordination of the capital improvement planning committee planned for April 5th. On March 29th, we had confirmation from Town Administrator Brown that the town budget meeting dates in the calendar did look okay to him, and the meeting schedule, for the town really happening in October. And then in April, we had April 1st coordination with the superintendent on meeting date to talk through the draft budget calendar, and that was planned and held on April 13th. So I did meet with the school to talk about the draft budget calendar and kind of their thoughts. And so it was definitely a working document at that time. On April 2nd, we had the town budget report. On April 6th, we had the open committee seat update to the budget committee, in which I circulated some information on the open seat. On April 6th, we also had an email by myself to Mrs. Burke, thanking Mrs. Burke for her interest in the budget committee seat and that the seat would be offered per our bylaws to Mr. Taylor as the next highest vote receiver at town election. On April 8th, we had Mrs. Harrison in a disagreement for the seemingly automatic appointment of Mr. Taylor. If you'd like to read your email, you're welcome to do that. I don't have it in front of me. On April 8th, Mrs. Flynn email to the committee also expressing disagreement with the appointment of Mr. Taylor. An additional point made on not being a committee I want to be associated with. Ms. Flynn, if you'd like, I know you're part of this evening's meeting. If you'd like to read your email afterwards, I'll give you the opportunity to do that. On April 8th, we had the legal request to review RSA 3215. I actually wanted to make sure that not only were we in compliance with RSA 3215, the municipal budget committee laws, but also that our bylaws were in full compliance. And so I did request legal to review that and seek their opinion on that. And what they did confirm is that the bylaws are actually above and beyond, right, what the RSA 3215, and it's adopted by this committee and it's accepted. On April 8th, we have Mr. Leary email on thoughts about specific bylaw language on vacancies. April 8th, Mr. Leary, a concern on Mrs. Flynn not being a resident of Litchfield. April 9th, we had a town budget report circulated. April 13th, Town Administrator Brown email that was circulated with the 2021 paving program that was approved. Some work has already been performed on that, as we've likely seen on Page and other areas, I think. Let's see, where were we? April 16th, Ms. Burke, you followed up on your emails on open seat vacancy and request for reconsideration. April 16th, the town budget report was circulated. April 18th, an email from former chairwoman, Mrs. Couture, as well as former Litchfield resident and BC member on the vacancy, sharing her thoughts. On April 18th, we had another email from Mrs. Couture with links to former meetings and minutes from actually August 25th of 2016. Where we talked as a committee about 45 minutes about vacancies and vacancy language in the bylaws as drafted. April 19th, an email from Mrs. Burke to the Budget Committee sharing exchange between herself as well with myself, where it was stated that the decision on the vacancy appointment is the will of the committee multiple times. April 19th, acknowledgement of Mrs. Burke's email by Mrs. Harrison. I think there's just a couple more here. April 19th, email from Mrs. Flynn with additional thoughts on the vacant seat. April 19th, an email from Mr. Sun on not being appropriate venue to discuss. Mr. Leary acknowledged that. April 19th, an email from myself to all Budget Committee members and all others that were a part of that email chain to refrain from additional emails, as this is a standing agenda item for this evening that we're going to get into. April 19th, an email from Mrs. Douglas on the legality of removing select board and school board members as voting members on the BC. And April 19th, NHMA did respond to that very directly.
Like I said, I was asked by a constituent. I didn't know for sure. I wanted to get a legal opinion. Thank you.
You're welcome. And so that was about a page and a half worth of correspondence. I think we're caught up, but I'll give the committee an opportunity to add anything I may have missed. I'll now turn it over to, I think, Ms. Harrison. You said no, you don't. Okay.
I'm good.
Ms. Flynn, would you like to read your email, or are you good with the summary I provided?
Sorry. No, I don't need to read the email. The only thing I wanted to clarify is I was not disagreeing with the appointment of Mr. Taylor, but with disagreeing with the process itself.
Got it. Thank you.
Oh, and sorry, Mr. Cutter, could you, I didn't catch the RSA about non-public. Could you repeat that RSA number, please?
RSA 91A:32, sections A through C.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you. All right. So nothing further to add on correspondence. All right. Next up in our agenda this evening is the open position appointment. And what I'd like to do is just take a couple of minutes of the committee's time and bring everyone up to speed and make sure that we're all in agreement with where we are at this moment in time. So during our March meeting, Ms. Burke and others are absolutely correct, where I did fully indicate that, I would work with the town and look to get the posting out there to the public for interest. Per our bylaws, I also exchanged the offering to Mr. Taylor, or the invitation to Mr. Taylor to continue to seek the seat if he was interested. After that meeting, a committee member approached me and said, hey, well, our bylaws are actually very clear that the appointment should actually be offered to Mr. Taylor, straight up. That's how our bylaws read. I know, Mr. Sun, if you can pull up the bylaws, I'd be glad to read that section for all, and everyone can see it on the WebEx, please. I did reach out to legal, actually town and legal twice on this matter, just to make sure that, again, we were in full compliance with RSA 3215, as well as within our bylaws that were fully adopted last year in June, our meeting in June of 2020. And just to be crystal clear here, in our bylaws that were accepted by this committee in June, there is a section within them, section 4, vacancies. And specifically, the point that is really being referenced here is point B, where it says the chair of the committee shall notify the next highest vote receiver for the budget committee that sought election to the committee and who received at least 1% of the vote at that year's annual town meeting of the vacancy and invite them to seek appointment until a member is appointed, right? And that's exactly the process that was followed, right? Never did I state that I was going to automatically appoint Mr. Taylor. It's the will of the committee. This committee has to vote, right? It's not a single person making that decision. It's the committee decision. And I want to make sure that's crystal clear. Right, and whether that happens tonight, whether the will of the committee is actually to proceed with the public posting, that is fine. But let's have that discussion tonight on what the will of the committee is. In my view, as well as legal view and what I circulated, is that we are fully able to vote and appoint Mr. Taylor tonight, given he did receive 490 votes, well greater than the 1% threshold according to our bylaws. So it is the will of the committee.
I think there's a confusion here too. There's an indication that says there were only 2 people on the ballot, therefore only 2 people received votes, and that's not accurate.
Yep.
I know people voted, Mr. Taylor and Ms. Stevens both received write-in ballots. They both are technically, it actually would be Ms. Stevens would be the next highest vote receiver, although she'd be probably not wise to accept the position since she'd have to run again in next March. But then Mr. Taylor is number 4. So I think the statement that there is no next highest vote getter is not quite accurate. There actually are other people who received, if we want to say race versus race, Mr. Taylor is legitimately the next highest vote getter. And I was in the discussions for this 1%, and the entire indication and the reason, well, first of all, the reason for this section is because what happened in March of 2016 was not necessarily agreed to by everybody, and why we wanted to codify how we would treat vacancies, because there was a resignation in the middle of a meeting in protest of how we handled that situation. This budget committee was not at all 100% on the way this went down. The discussion in March, because I've read the minutes, was that we would post it while additional research was done. There was additional research that was done. There was a subsequent email from the chairman that outlined 15 years worth of vacancies. And when the vacancies were immediately following an election, the next highest vote receiver was appointed. The majority of the vacancies occurred in September and October. There was even a joke about how October was a rough year for vacancies. Naturally, October is so far after an election that it makes sense to interview. So it was apples and oranges. I think the budget committee got it wrong in March, and it's disappointing to me that the same people are pushing for the same mistake. So the whole point of the 1% was to make sure that somebody didn't vote for themselves and win the position with 1 vote. The intention was that the person needed to seek the position, actively engage the voters, and put themselves out there. Mr. Taylor did that. Ms. Stevens did that. So in my opinion, I have no problem, and if the floor opens, I would nominate Mr. Taylor tonight for that position, because I absolutely am convinced that we're in compliance with these bylaws and the intent.
Mr. Sun.
Mr. Chair, so, I've had an opportunity to read these, and I think, having not been a part of those conversations 5 years ago, although I did have a chance to go back and read and watch from the information that was shared a couple of weeks ago, I think there's 2 things that stand out to me. You read section B or letter B of section 4, as it talks about the appointment. I actually think section A prior to that is really important, because that's a part that I think has been misunderstood through this process, that when the word appointment was used, it was assumed that was just a confirmation without any sort of a vote. I was always under, especially by reading these bylaws, that any sort of appointment was going to require a majority vote. And I think
Absolutely.
we all felt that for the most part. I think the second piece of that is there seems, and I've heard this in multiple occasions, there's been an allusion to the fact that there were two different positions, a 2-year and a 3-year. And while that is true, I don't see that called out within our bylaws. There's no reference to a 2-year or a 3-year position. It speaks to someone who ran for a position. So I feel like that piece is a moot point because, again, and I'm putting on the lens having not been there 5 years ago and reading the bylaws as they are here in front of us, that's my takeaway from that. And the opportunity to have Mr. Taylor appointed and the committee vote on him tonight, I think is a fair process and following what's laid out in front of us. However that plays out is the will of the committee.
I actually reached the same conclusion. I spent some time today, and my disagreement was with the process being that I wasn't on the board in 2016, but I was on the board last October. And so that was my experience of appointing someone to fill a vacancy. And in that process, we posted it, we invited everybody. And actually, there was, Mr. Taylor was nominated as he would be according to the bylaws. But then also Mr. Barca was nominated, and we voted on Mr. Barca before we voted on Mr. Taylor. I went back and watched the meeting and read the minutes. So I think that was in violation of our bylaws, in opposition of the bylaws. But that was what I had experienced, and that was what I understood to be the process.
Yep.
Going back and watching the August 25th, 2016 meeting and the September 24th meeting from last year, the process is outlined beautifully in the bylaws, and actually section C is what did it for me, because it does speak to if it speaks to the process being that it's basically Mr. Taylor as the candidate that ran in the election gets first dibs at the nomination and at the appointment. So my disagreement was with the process, not with Mr. Taylor. And so in doing my homework and rereading the bylaws, I think it's pretty clear. And I do wish there was better communication about what happened between the last meeting when we said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to invite everybody. And then all of a sudden we checked with legal and we're not doing that anymore. I think not involving the committee as part of that discussion. I think for me anyway, I missed out on what happened,
Yep.
why did we consult legal? Like what's the difference between what changed after that meeting? But now, you've explained it and.
Yeah, fair point. And we always have to be sensitive to RSA 91A to know, and how a lot of these emails, as happened on April 19th very recently, right, where there were lots of respondents, right? And that there's a lot of people that are passionate about this, right? And
You
so
don't wanna
what I
trigger
didn't want to do
anything.
is trigger that.
Yeah.
Right.
We've been there before.
And in full transparency, I suggested to Mr. Cutter about checking with legal because I felt like in reading the bylaws, I had my own interpretation of
Yeah.
that, but I felt like our due diligence was to make sure it's not necessarily John David's interpretation, or want to make sure we're following this as we should. And so that was part of the reason we checked there was I felt like it was our obligation to make sure we're interpreting these correctly as they're written.
I'd like to give those on the phone an opportunity. That's all right.
Absolutely.
We'll start with Ms. Stevens. What are your thoughts, please?
Well, obviously, I was not a part of the original conversations either, but the bylaws were very clear. And I did watch the 2016 meeting, and it sounded like everything lined up with that, with how the bylaws are written. If there is that much disagreement with the process, we can always change the bylaws and say to seek appointment or seek interviewees concurrently, if that's the will of the board. I am not thrilled, Mr. Cutter, that you had said that you would post the position and then decided not to. I feel like that should have been more clear to the public, but other than that, I think we can go either way.
We absolutely have that opportunity tonight. If the will of the board is to continue with posting, we should do that. But the reason for not doing that, I want to be clear here, is because the bylaws are clear, right? And I felt like it was worth a conversation amongst our committee on how to proceed.
Yes, they are clear, but it's also clear that even the chairman of the board at the time the bylaws were written didn't interpret them that way. Her understanding was that it was put to the public at
Just
the
to be
same
crystal clear
same
for
time.
bylaws,
No, I understand and I agree with you that we are doing everything to the process
I wrote the
that is written in
bylaws.
the bylaws. Right.
I am
but-
the author of these bylaws.
No, I understand that you've done everything correctly to the bylaws. I was just disappointed that, you had said that you would and then you didn't. That's all.
Mr. Barca.
I guess I would agree with everyone in that it's well in our purview to nominate someone tonight and not post. The bylaws are pretty clear. The RSAs are clear. Legal was clear. We are able to do that. I think my opinion is that in my history of, in 15 years in Litchfield and in 6 years on boards and nominating, 2 people for similar things on the school board, perception is reality. If there's a perception out there that we're not doing things on the up and up, if we're not posting things for the public to see and giving everyone an opportunity to kind of voice their minds, that's going to be reality. It's going to look like that we're doing something shady, we're hiding behind legal, even though we're doing everything on the up and up. Perception is reality. I think we should post. I think we should, interview people. I think we should see who's out there. I also think this is a unique situation in that when I first saw Nikki resign, Mr. Taylor was my first thought. Of course, why wouldn't we give it to him? I think this situation is a little interesting in that one could argue this is actually Mrs. Bork's seat. She resigned from the seat. She was duly elected to this seat and resigned for whatever reason she did. So if she's open to reassuming that seat, why not listen to her and give her that chance?
Mr. Hayes.
Yes, my opinion is that the bylaws are pretty straightforward. I mean, I've read them and reread them. And Section B, I think we should proceed with a vote for Mr. Taylor if he's willing to join the committee. And if the vote is no by the committee, then we open it up as a second phase and post the position in the town. And that's how I interpret it, and that's how I expect this to go forward this evening.
Thank you. Mr. Leary.
Yes. Carrie was pretty spot on with what she was talking about with following the rule. Mr. Chairman, you've done everything according to the law, according to how things are done. On the selectmen's side, we had a member that resigned this past October, and we appointed actually it was after October, it was November, I think. But we appointed someone, Ms. Queenan, to fill the seat, and she was the next highest vote getter. We didn't put it out there. We followed the same bylaws, basically, as you guys are following, and she only served for 4 meetings, and then she ran again. I think you've done everything legally. I think you've done your due diligence, and it's just up to the will of the committee now how they want to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone sharing their input. So with that,
I move for a vote.
okay.
I move for a vote. So I mean, do we have to vote on a vote, or can I just make a nomination?
I think what we'll do is we'll vote if that's the will of the committee to vote, and if it fails, then we'll vote to make it public.
All right. I nominate Mr. Scott Taylor to fill the vacant position.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Douglas on the nomination of Mr. Taylor, a second by Mr. Sun. Further discussion? Okay, we'll do a roll call vote, and I'll start with Mr. Barca.
Nothing against Mr. Taylor. It's more a process for me, so it's a no.
Okay. Mr. Hayes?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Leary?
Yes.
Ms. Stevens?
Yes.
Let's see. Mr. Sun?
Yes.
Ms. Harrison? Douglas?
Yes.
I am also a yes. That passes 7-1-0. Welcome, Mr. Taylor.
Very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, so just for point of clarification, Mr. Taylor will not be voting this evening. He does need to get sworn in again, but you're welcome to join at the table or stay where you are, whatever you're.
Stay here is fine. Thank you.
Okay. Moving into town business, Mr. Leary, I'll turn it over to you for some updates, please.
Yes, I guess as most people know, the paving project has started and they're well underway. Continental is doing the work in town as usual. They've done it for a number of years, done a very nice job and treated the town very fairly. We also have coordinated with the town of Hudson to do the end of Page Road where it meets 102 because a section of that is actually in Hudson. So they agreed to do it. Continental's doing it while they do their regular paving. And we also have added a section of Pilgrim Drive that was really in disrepair. Other than that, we've got the clearing going over by the landfill, a little bit of trees and stuff taken down, and then they're going to re-landscape it just to make the sight lines a little bit better. We have a new conservation chairman. Mr. Matt Lepore is now the new chairman of the Conservation Commission. We appointed, oh my gosh, I can't remember his name. Geez, I don't have any paperwork in front of me. I'm sorry.
It's Mr. Lepore.
At Lepore.
Yeah, not Mr. Lepore. Jason Brennan to fill a spot on the Conservation Commission. That's what I was looking for. And I think that's pretty much it with the town. And we have to put a new roof on the old historical building, the one that's supposed to be getting painted, but the painter's been pretty lax. So, but we're putting out bids for that now. Yeah, I have some volunteer helpers. It's very nice. Much appreciated.
So, any questions for the town?
Yeah, I have one question for Mr. Leary. In regards to pulling out of the dump, for lack of any other word to call it, and as you're heading right, where the trees were taken down, is the possibility of knocking down that knoll and taking away the shrubs so that it would improve the visibility when you're turning left?
Yeah, that's kind of the whole thought process behind there is to improve the visibility. And Rick from Continental Paving is going to meet with Troy Brown and then a couple of concerned citizens about the sight lines and what's going to be there and whether it's going to look nice or not. So that's all discussions that are in the works right now. But yeah, the whole idea behind this is to improve the sight lines.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Leary.
No problem. Thank you.
Further questions for the town, please? Moving into the RSA 3222 and the expense reports that we receive. Any questions on the town expenses year to date? Hearing and seeing none. We'll shift into the school. Ms. Harrison.
Actually, Mrs. Flynn just sent the monthly budget report out to the committee
Oh, great.
upon my request. So you should all have that in your inboxes, or it should be arriving shortly. We had our meeting last night and discussed a few matters, budget concerning the budget. We had a discussion about CARES and ESSER funds. We have an estimate on how much money we'll be getting. A lot of that is earmarked for HVAC and air circulation systems at all three schools, as those repairs are ongoing. But we are collecting input from staff, teachers, admins, for targeted programming, remediation to close some gaps, learning gaps that we've experienced through COVID, technology, supplies, anything else. So we're kind of collating that list at this point. We have a list of expenditures that we've made of those funds to this point, and that will be publicly available soon. It'll be posted. I believe it's in the meeting materials, but we'll have a link to that on the website so that everyone, it's transparent and open and everybody can follow where that money is going. Let's see.
Just in terms of the air handling at the schools, right? Putting GMS aside, we've been talking a lot about the air quality over the past several months, really over the past year, right? Where are we in terms of being complete with the work at LMS and CHS?
CHS does have some ongoing, they do now have controls of the systems.
That should be a huge improvement, right?
Which should be, yeah, it has been a huge improvement, and that's ongoing as things come up. I think it's just at this point, I believe, and JD weigh in if I'm wrong, but I believe at this point, CHS is about 90% where we need to be. LMS is actually the huge elephant in the room when it comes to HVAC, because the system is antiquated. It was, valves, and they've had no control systems. So that is the big project that we're focusing on,
Yeah,
with some other renovations.
And I have some updates too from
Committee.
school facilities,
Yeah.
because there was a lot of talk around efficiencies at CHS, and I can share some information too.
That's right, and LMS as well.
Yeah.
So those are, LMS is kind of the problem child at this point. GMS, we've made good progress, but there's still a long ways to go, but
Okay.
it's still ongoing.
Question, one of the things I heard Corey speak to during the school board meeting was, with this new round of stimulus funding that's coming, which I've heard is upwards of anywhere from 5 to 10 times what we saw with the original CARES funding. There's also some widening of scope as to how that can be used.
Yeah.
And so one of the things examples I've heard is roofing, because you connect that into HVAC and air quality.
Exactly, and that's where the LMS project comes in. I mean, it's all encompassing, and reconfiguring the main office, the conference room area, the kitchen at LMS, all of those kind of tie together. So I think that's kind of why the district has decided to go at it as a two-phase project and get it all buttoned up. And so those funds can be used for those things. But I mean, I think aside from that, there are definitely going to be some needs that we see with students and staff and educational programming that we need to address as well. So it's in the works. The other update that we had was our previous meeting, we voted to the portables at LMS and work towards moving the 5th grade into the LMS building right now.
That's great news.
Right.
Fantastic.
It is fantastic news. I mean, the lease payments alone, we're still paying on this lease that was supposed to be, those were supposed to be very temporary portables 15 years later.
Pay them off like 5 times over.
Exactly. We paid them off 5 times over, and because they're, the energy costs alone of heating and lighting those portables is $44,000 a year. And so by getting rid of those, that's additional, that's found money basically to go into further repairs at LMS.
Safety aspect.
And the safety aspect is
I think
huge.
you also find that a lot of parents will be excited to hear that their kids don't have to go into the building
Right.
to use the restrooms. They'll
Right.
have closer access to their locker.
Having a 5th grader in the
Yeah.
portables, right, firsthand. I mean, the bathroom with COVID, right, has
Yeah.
been a real challenge.
It
this year,
has.
so.
It has, and those rooms are smaller, and
Yes.
they're this year in particular, the 5th grade and 6th grade have been bigger, so there are a lot of challenges. So we were really happy to be able to reconfigure things because we have smaller class sizes now in 7th and 8th and move through.
So my question there would be though, once the students, I assume we still are operating on a lower daily occupancy. Once more students come back,
Yeah, we're about 91% in school.
so we believe we'll still continue to have the space within the building to continue to add 4 classrooms inside.
We do, because over the years, we have expanded programming and used those rooms, but we're looking for ways to consolidate programming. We have a lot of rooms that are used, half a day here, half a day there, so we're hopeful that we can.
No, I think it's great. I would just hate to see like, oh, all the kids are back now, we lost their space. So I'm glad that you're
Right,
thinking.
right. The other piece of it, though, is that we're expecting to move 5th grade into a new GMS. This is,
In 2 or 3 years from now.
right,
It's-
exactly.
yeah.
As
I
the-
actually asked that question too, because and while the next 5th grade class that's coming in is a dip, it spikes back up a little bit. They've taken that into consideration.
And we had a food service update. So we received word that the federal funding for food, for breakfast and lunches, right now they're free to all students. We're actually being reimbursed by the government at a higher rate than what students would pay. But we have lost a lot of a la carte sales and vending and things like that that really make up the local sale revenue has taken a hard hit because of COVID and what we can offer. And so we're running at a deficit this year, but as we're looking towards next year, we anticipate the return of some of those local revenues And they've extended the program for another year, so
Oh.
it ends now June of 22. So we'll be reimbursed for every full lunch meal for breakfast and lunch.
It's never going.
Students or parents a pay.
Excellent.
So that's it.
Thank you for those updates.
Sure.
Any questions for the school? Hearing and seeing none. We haven't received an updated expense report, right? Just the BA report? It may have
just
just
the
been sent
BA
to me, so I
report.
haven't looked at it yet.
It's what we saw last night. It's like monthly.
So if you want to make sure that's flipped to the committee, that'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, before we move into member input, new business, anything else for the school this evening? Okay, hearing none. Shifting gears into member input, new business. We have the budget calendar from 2021, 2022. I'm going to put you on the spot, Mr. Sun.
I knew. Give me 30 seconds.
There's one Tuesday, I think.
So we'll go through it here. So just to refresh everyone on the budget calendar, and Mr. Taylor, I'll gladly circulate this to you as well. I did meet with the town. The town approved the dates, very consistent with last year's schedule. Also met with the school, and the school and I had a working session along with John David to come up with the proposal here. This is not accepted by the committee yet. It's a draft. So if the committee has insights, now is a great time to talk about that. So, we'll meet in May for a regularly scheduled meeting, June, July. July, there will be no meeting consistent with past years, August and September regular meetings, and then it really begins the budget season late September and throughout October. Currently, the way we have this set up is all committee meetings this year will start at 7. Again,
Thank
the
you.
will of the committee, right? Ending at a hard stop at 9:30.
I can talk fast.
Okay, and so that is the plan. So September 30th, October 7th, 14th, 21st, and 28th are dates that we're planning. The 28th is a tentative date, depending upon, how we proceed through the town. If we don't need a meeting, I'm not one to have a meeting. Right? We actually saw that last year where we canceled the meeting out of the calendar because we didn't need it. And so that could happen again this year as well. Shifting gears into the school, we do have a bit of a challenge this year with the way Veterans Day falls, which happens to fall on a Thursday, November 11th. And I think there's actually 2 or 3 days off during the school season that week as well. And so we're trying to plan around not meeting that November 11th timeframe. And to accommodate that, what we kind of worked out with the school is on November 2nd, would be the date or the planned or anticipated date where the school will deliver the budget committee a very draft document with the school budget. The first committee meeting or the first joint budget session with the school and town officials, format to be determined. I think we were talking about having it in town hall with different leaders, department heads within the school presenting, budget committee being a part of that, both on November 4th and again on November 9th. That then gives the committee a good week and a half, couple weeks there to then digest that information, come back on the 18th with our school budget review session. So we'll spend the 2.5 hours on November 18th deliberating and sharing our thoughts, asking additional questions. If there are specific questions that we weren't able to ask in preparation for the joint budget sessions on November 4th and November 9th, that would be our opportunity to do that. And then voting would be occurring December 2nd, December 9th, and December 16th would be the review of the warrant articles. So trying to keep it streamlined, trying to keep it efficient. I know the superintendent was very appreciative of trying to continue the streamlined process and thank the committee for their willingness to do that. I know we all had some frustrations. Some of us had some frustrations, including myself last year. And we're going to give this a go again. Right, and understanding that it's less of a commitment for the staff and the department heads to present once instead of twice. So I would ask the committee as we think about going into November to do our due diligence in advance because it helps everyone.
I'd like to add just a few things on the school budget process. And I will say, I think we walked away from the conversation with the school district and felt very positive that it was collaborative. And but a few things to note. and please, Mr. Chair, or Ms. Harrison, correct me if I'm wrong here, but November 4th and November 9th are designed for us to view. So that is when the school board is actually making any decisions or any proposed cuts. So we would simply observe and listen, and then have, as Mr. Cutter said, a week and a half to really kind of absorb that for our meetings. The November 18th session, and this was something that was asked for by Dr. Jetty, is to be able to bring in principals or department chairs as needed virtually. I know that was part of a concern that we had last year, is it was kind of a time gap where we would ask questions, we'd have to wait for things to come back. So leveraging the technology that we have to have principals or department chairs, essentially kind of join on the fly as needed as questions come up, I think will help us expedite this process. And it's a good respect of their time as well, which hopefully, moves us through this process pretty quickly this year.
100%. I would just add, though, that if there are questions, like, let's not hold them till that November 18th
Yeah.
meeting.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Let's have them in advance. There is an opportunity for Q&A at November 4th and November 9th. There always is.
Mhm.
So I would encourage the committee to ask if you have a question. So shifting gears into January, right? Already talking about January of 2022, time flies. This is when we'll be voting warrant articles. The budget hearing, I'm planning for January 13th. Obviously, those dates have not been finalized at the state level, so that's when I'm anticipating having it. Could change. And then obviously deliberative, subject to whatever the decision is on a joint session again or a split out session. I have no idea yet. So I just put those dates in as a placeholder, and then March 8th would be annual meeting. Questions, comments?
Are you voting to accept this calendar this evening?
I would like to.
Make a motion to accept the budget calendar as presented.
We have a motion by Mr. Sun. Is there a second? Second by Mrs. Harrison.
So, but when we're voting, then we're accepting that like the January through in February are still kind of like
If
in
you
the
scroll,
flux?
if you scroll all the way down, there's a disclaimer.
Well,
On the third page.
Cleverly hidden.
and that's why I don't mind voting for the dates, but I guess, so are we going to wait till we get closer to decide if it's going to be 2 deliberatives or 1? I just know that there was
Yeah.
a concern about like legal getting booked up way early, and then if we make a choice, then we may not have a choice because the lawyers may not be available. I mean, I do accept that February 12th is really late this year for the second deliberative, but that's actually when, so I looked at the RSA, I'm like, there's no way February 12th is correct.
It is.
It is.
It is.
I was like, it's because January 31st is the last Monday in December. I'm
It
like,
is correct.
"Gee."
I think, should the committee accept this as our working schedule, obviously subject to changes as we get closer to some of these dates, right? I think what this will do is spark the interest and debate again
Mhm.
by both the town and the school to figure out how we are going to proceed with deliberative, right? And I would encourage both Mr. Leary and Mrs. Harrison to start those conversations with your board once again to figure out.
Yeah, I wasn't sure who made that decision.
Well, I just know I generally prefer 2 separate deliberatives because I can only focus so long on one thing. But the fact that the second deliberative would be February 12th might make me reconsider for this year, just because that's really late into February.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like the flexibility that if we find ourselves with limited warrant articles, then let's do it in one day if we can. And if
I
that,
think that's the big unknown.
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Is warrant articles. And I know that the town clerk had some thoughts against session. But, well, let's start that conversation again and come to a conclusion.
I think for some people, it makes it easier because you know that at 10 a.m. or whatever, I'm going to discuss this. Whereas if you split it out, you're like, well, I'm not sure when we're going to get to the school. It's kind of iffy.
But I actually think
We had it
LCTV
scheduled.
also had thoughts here, right? Because of the double time needed to set up the
Yeah,
equipment.
mobilization effort. Single
Yeah,
event is
that's right.
much
Yeah.
preferable over 2 separate
That
events.
makes sense.
So you and the town clerk get to duke it out.
I could have the town clerk wrong now that I think about it, but I know there were comments coming
Yeah,
from that
that
side.
makes sense. And I believe the second session was scheduled for a certain time.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
we started, so like I arrived
Yeah,
at
yeah,
1 to do
yeah.
the school.
I know,
the
but I'd
school
like to-
district section.
So it only stinks for the budget committee.
I just,
Yeah, it's only a problem for you, for us, well, us now.
so, yeah, I guess then if we're going to do a second one, my main concern would be I'd rather not have like 3 hours in between them. I'd like to if town's done in like
You
an
don't
hour.
know. You
Right.
can't-
I know I don't
you
know.
can't anticipate public comment, right? Like the solar panels brought up, a lot of comment this year.
I know, but oh my goodness. Yeah.
All right, so we have a motion and a second, further conversation. All right, we'll call the vote. Let's see, Ms. Harrison.
Yes, I.
Yes, Mr. Sun?
Yes.
Douglas?
Yes.
I am a yes. We have online Ms. Stevens,
Yes.
Mr. Hayes,
Yes.
Mr. Barca,
Yes.
Mr. Leary. Mr. Leary? Either way, it passes.
Yes, please.
Yes, please. Okay, it passes 8-0-0. All right. Next up, we have our bylaws, which have been a discussion and debate. I don't know if the committee wants to wait another month, go through them one more time. If there are changes to specific sections like vacancies, now is the opportunity to circulate that language. We can talk about it. Or if the committee's happy with the language, we can vote to adopt. Any thoughts from those connected remotely this evening?
I'm good with them.
So I just have a question. So was it only last year that the historical way of filling a vacancy was changed? I've heard two stories. I understand this is how the bylaws are written, and then I hear, well, historically we do it this way. Does anyone know what actually has happened historically? Or was it only that one last year that it was open to the public at the same time?
That was kind of my question.
Yeah, I mean, so
The
last
bylaws,
year,
but we have past practice.
last
too.
year was the will of the committee and it was late in the season, right? And we felt that, at least my recollection was we felt that it was appropriate to post publicly, which is why we did, right? This year, because it was so close, literally the day, like a couple days after the election, right? And a committee member brought it up with the bylaws. I thought it warranted a debate amongst the committee and then making a decision whether we appoint or whether we publicly post.
So maybe it's worth having a timeline, like if before the resignation occurs before the first meeting.
That was part of the
Of the
discussion.
In the
new
back in
season.
2016 meeting, we talked about this,
I know,
right?
but
Whether
it's
it
not
was
like, it's not
90
like,
May, June, right? 90 days, we talked
Right.
about a period.
that's right. To me, I thought that it was more of a trying to prevent what happened in March 16th.
I actually feel because I watched that meeting and I think it was actually Mr. Bork who gave an example about someone running and it wasn't the will of the committee. Was it automatically going to go to that person?
Right.
I heard that and read the bylaws and thought they're written in a way to prevent the example that he gave where you were trying to protect yourself against something like that because it requires the appointment by majority vote. And I think because it's written that way, it allows the committee to, offer it to someone who runs, who receives 1% of the vote. The committee could very easily vote that down 0.8, 0.9, and then open it up to the public.
Do you think it's worth it adding the by majority vote language next to appointment? Because I think,
It's in there.
is it?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that was a point of debate even just this evening, right? Where it said appointment and some committee members assumed that it was an automatic appointment.
Well, then
Not by vote.
so then I guess my opinion would be if anybody,
So section A, yeah.
does it say, like,
Yeah, by majority vote.
so long as it's clear, then I think,
Well, and I think that's where the confusion was. The bylaws are clear, but I was going based on past practice. And so I think Kate's question is valid.
It is.
I mean, was it just a one-off that we opened it up in October, or what has historically happened? Because I'm sure that in the past, it's only 5 years since 2016, it seems like forever, that there have been, I don't know how many vacancies have been filled.
I think one of the things that came up though is a lot of times you'll find that we haven't run enough people to have it back like somebody else.
Right, it's a nice
We've
problem
had
to have.
Mrs. 40 won her first seat with one person running for 2 spots. So, I mean, she was a write-in with a handful of votes. So we
happens.
don't often have the next highest vote getter because we don't often have that many people on the ballot running. So I think in the past, it's been opened up because there was no one to reach out to.
I know, I believe it was when Mr. Cutter resigned in 2018 that it was opened up to the community. I came and interviewed. My understanding was that it was a similar situation and that there wasn't anyone running, and hence it was opened up to the community for an interview.
Yeah, and that's why I voted the way I did tonight, because this situation, I got to side with the bylaws.
So I'm
So-
happy to,
But I
entertain
do-
adjustments or.
But I do think, I mean, I don't know.
So my main thing, I don't mind clarifying that within the first 90 days of a season, and then after that, it gets opened up to an interview because things can change. You never know at that point. So, because somebody who was interested in October might say, or who didn't run might say, you know what, I actually am really interested. I don't like how things are going. I'd like to get involved, or I didn't have an ability. But then you're talking October, you're halfway through the season.
But I don't know. I don't know that makes a difference. And I know Jen brought this up in that meeting in 2016, and I think deciding that, yeah, I should have run, I'm really interested and I want to do this, it doesn't make a difference when in the season it is.
That's fine with me. I just don't want to say, well, we did it in October. We opened it to everybody. So why in March 17th are you now not doing the same thing?
Right.
So if it's going to be that we're going to revert to this, then
Really?
I'm fine with it if it happens in December, so long as everybody's okay with.
Right.
That's-
Well, and that's kind of, I think, where Kate is coming from, and it's where I'm coming from too. If the past practice is that we've opened it up and we've invited to apply, but we've opened it up, then maybe we need to amend the bylaws.
I think the part that is slightly confusing is that if you read the end of section B, talks about the person's invited received 1% of the vote and invite them to seek appointment until a member is appointed.
Which would be the next election.
So that's what
That's what-
that's not
yeah.
clear to me. I've read that multiple times and I was thinking, so is that saying you appoint someone and then you're going through another process?
I think maybe,
before-
seek appointment until a member is elected.
that
Or, yeah, until the next election.
that
till the
is
position
clear to me.
Yeah.
I think the last appointment there before the period should be elected.
Yeah.
I do want to hear what the other members have to say, though, I feel.
Well, and then you
Yeah.
want to say a member is elected by what is the community called? Legal terms are, because it's not governing board, it's the.
So, Ms. Stevens, I'm not sure we answered your question, but we tried.
I agree with your question if I can agree with a question.
Would it make sense to just strike that until a member is appointed? Just invite them to seek appointment?
That I think either that or until the next town election. I think either or.
So if you want to do this, I'll ask John David. Do you mind just modifying that bullet? Circulating it to the committee? And then we can vote on it at our next meeting.
By the bylaws, we can't.
And then, oh, sorry. And then the question is for C, right now, we're following it to the letter in the scenario which no candidates appointed, then we seek the public to apply. But historically, it sounds like it's concurrent. Do we need to change that or not? That's just the question I have. It could go either way.
I think just clarify B and let C go on its own. That's my thoughts on that.
Yeah. Could you say that again, Ms. Stevens? I apologize. I was multitasking with this.
Sure. Letter C says, in the scenario in which no candidate is appointed from those that sought election to committee, the committee shall advertise in local media to appoint a person to the committee. So my question was, historically, it sounds like it's been more something like the committee concurrently shall advertise in local media. So the question was, do we want to amend the bylaws to reflect that? Or just keep it how it is? And it just so happens that the past 5 years it has ended up the way that it has.
And without having that, without going back and watching all of those interviews, I think that's was it opened up, with the exception of last year, was it opened up in the past because there was no one else that ran and that defaulted to option C here?
I can remember a number of times where we defaulted to C
Yeah.
because there was no B.
That's what I'm thinking might have just been the confusion.
Right.
Yeah.
So I will strike the part that is highlighted there and circulate that this evening.
Yeah, I think that clarifies
Yeah,
it.
and I think we leave C alone.
Yeah, because
Yep, I agree on that.
Okay. Any other comments on the bylaws? It sounds like we're going to make a couple of minor modifications. Anything else we should address within the bylaw document?
I guess
ahead.
my question would be,
Go ahead.
I guess I was gonna say, for me, I think it's still unclear, like the consistency thing, like why last year did you open it up and not just offer it?
Yeah. And again, my view is it was the will of the committee at the time. I have to go
So-
back and look.
yeah, I don't remember the situation, who ran and who,
Jen ran, Mr.
Sorry.
Taylor ran. Jen won, Mr. Taylor was the next highest vote getter, and he was invited. It was opened up concurrently, so
Yes.
Mr. Barca and
Mr. Barker ran
Jeff
too, that's
Town
right. Yeah.
expressed interest, and
oh,
then
that's right, yeah,
they were invited, they spoke, they all spoke, and then,
that's right. And then I default to B when I make my arguments, so I just, yeah, no, I think then like, are bad.
Like I said, it was the will of the committee at the time, so. All right.
If we're finished with that, I had a question about the social media correspondence, or I forget what it was called, but
Yes.
I know that and I don't know if we need to write this in the bylaws or not. The budget committee cannot respond to social media. I just wanted to know and get everybody's opinion on if someone posts something and has a question, like a clarification question, why did the committee vote this way, or what does this mean? Can I respond to that just for clarification, not speaking for the board? Or should I just not say anything?
It's a great question. It's one that we've debated heavily under RSA 91A. And the reason why that is put in there is that so we don't have a situation where multiple committee members are posting responses, because that then is subject to RSA 91A. And if there's more than, 4 committee members?
I
5
think
committee
it's
members
5 or
now,
4.
right, responding, which has happened in the past. It's classified as a meeting.
yeah. So just
Okay.
one way that we've kind of gotten around that as on the school board is I've kind of taken on the role of the social media responder. So like we might have, we're a much smaller committee, so I think it's easier to keep track of who's commented and who hasn't. But we have kind of designated myself as the person to answer those questions and to provide clarification.
You do a great job with it.
Thank you, I try.
I know that when you do it, you're doing it under an account that it's not your personal account, right?
Right, we have a Litchfield School Board page, so
Correct.
I run
And-
that page,
Yeah.
yeah. But
Do
there
we
have been times,
And I think the spirit of,
It's been a debate in the past too.
But it
We
was just
don't-
posted to the town.
We don't have a page. It's posted through WordPress in conjunction with Mr. Brunel.
Is there an ability to comment on that page? I'm sorry, I don't check it that often.
so,
I don't believe.
but what Mr. Brunel does is he then takes that and cross posts it on social
Twitter
media.
and other.
so then
For
people
town
make a
site.
comment, or people say, hey, what happened in the budget committee last night? Why did this vote go this way?
I think the spirit of Miss Stevens' questions, because her and I talked about this when I shared with her how I did it last year, is if someone asks a clarifying question, what was the vote on this particular item, right? Something that's very
Mhm.
matter of fact. To me, that is different than if someone says, why did the budget committee vote this down? That's more of an opinion versus a factual statement. And I think, you know, you could get
In
into
that
gray
case,
areas.
oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I was thinking in that case, I could even just say like, see the meeting around this minute or something.
It's the video, yeah.
So I think if
Yeah.
you designate one person and only that one person does the responding, then we're not foul of the 91A.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So, I mean, Ms. Stevens, if you want to take that on, at least I would be super appreciative. I think I speak on behalf of the committee for that as well.
Roll it into
And if
the-
anybody sees something that I need to respond to, if I don't see anything, I don't mind doing that because, like I said before, I try to be open with the boards, you know, with communication and everything, make it a little more accessible. If anything, I might even just respond with like email this person with your question.
Mhm.
But I don't know that that needs to be in the bylaws. I just wanted to make sure that everyone was comfortable with that sort of thing.
Be worth adding just a, you know, the social media archivist will
Be the person.
will be designated to respond and
Is there anything in the bylaws that specifically speaks to that?
Is it response? I don't
Or
recall.
the social media archivist?
Yes, we added it last year.
Just 'cause it was-
If you go to the top where it captures modifications, it tells you the section where it is. Added section VF. So, Ms. Stevens, what I'd ask then, you know, if you wouldn't mind just drafting a sentence, circulating that to the committee, and we can add that in, we vote next in May.
That sounds good.
Awesome. All right, anything else on the bylaws this evening? Hearing none. We'll shift gears at this point into the Capital Improvement Planning Committee update. That is on me. So we did meet on April 5th, which was actually our first quarterly meeting for the year. We talked about, you know, a lot of priorities. Certainly the school presented. Just by point of reference, Mr. Croto was reelected as chair. Mr. Flynn was reelected as vice chair of that committee. The intention is that we'll meet quarterly, just to refresh it and keep it a living, breathing document. The plow truck, which was voter approved in March, was purchased and actually has been acquired and is on site. I saw it actually last week. So that's already here and it's going to be outfitted with the wing plows, I'm told. 2021 road projects, road paving projects, as Mr. Leary had already commented this evening, were also presented. I think the interesting thing, one of the interesting things that came out from that meeting for me was there's a grant application underway for $600,000 to extend the sidewalk up Pinecrest to Albuquerque. And so that will cover about 80% of the cost of that total project. More to come on that, but there's a grant underway for this purpose.
So would the other 20% then have to go to warrant, or would it be?
Or from the operating budget on assigned fund balance. I'm not sure where the other 20% is going to come from, but we need to see if we get the grant.
Right.
That is, I know something that went to vote 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It didn't pass, but I know there's a lot of interest from the community too. So, Town Administrator Brown provided an update on the American Rescue Plan, in which the Litchfield as a town could receive $860,000 in funds. Nothing final on that yet, but that's hopefully forthcoming. That would be great. And then the school facilities plan was provided by Mr. Izabicki, the business administrator. I don't want to steal your thunder, right?
Spoke to some of it a bit. Do you
Yeah,
have
I
more to
mean,
add?
look, so there were talks about GMS repairs continue really on an as-needed basis, putting out the fires as they come up.
not literal fires.
Not literal
just so
fires, but
everybody
you know, as
knows.
immediate
There've been
priorities.
no fires at GMS.
Although I did see a picture of a excavator there, right? Not too long ago. So I understand there's work commencing on engaging with an architect for kind of the starting to think about in drawings of what a new GMS would look like. LMS, as I believe you mentioned earlier, Ms. Harrison, planning for the main office renovation, kitchen renovation, which was actually a separate line item in the CIPC plan. Roof replacement, energy efficiency, HVAC updates, etc. CHS was mentioned as not the primary focus. CARES Act, as you mentioned this evening. Chief Sergeant also was on and presented an update. Really no news was the update. They're also continuing to explore grants for police activity as well as potentially station and costs that could offset that. And the next quarterly will be held on. Questions on the CIPC? No? Facilities.
I think we've spoken to a lot of it already, but on April 7th, that afternoon, I had a chance to join the School Facilities Improvement Committee, Ms. Harrison, Mr. Burke, Superintendent Jetty, Mr. Isbicki, that was everybody. Michelle was there as well.
Steve Weber is the rep from this.
Correct,
from the town,
yes.
but he wasn't able.
Correct. We spent the first part of that meeting taking a look at a thermal imaging report that looked at CHS and LMS. We didn't get into GMS. It really highlighted some inefficiencies that Ms. Harrison referred to. So we spent a good amount of time going through that with the company. Talked a lot about LMS, and I would say the bulk of that conversation was around the portables. So taking a look at enrollment projections, taking a look at a plan for where those fifth grades would go into LMS. And we got into some details with the principal around that. Did not get a ton into GMS. The bulk of the time was spent around the HVAC work and LMS, but we did hit on some things that Mr. Cutter talked about with the architect selection and some next steps with that. That was the school facilities group.
How often are you guys meeting?
Monthly. Yep.
Thank you. Any questions for the facilities improvement? Hearing and seeing none, we'll close that and move into our second public input for the evening.
Good evening. May I speak?
Yes, please.
Awesome. Jen Burke, 1 Westview Drive. So first of all, thank you all for taking the time tonight and giving me this opportunity to speak to you all. I wanted to start off by saying, first and foremost, Mr. Taylor knows this, but for the rest of the committee, this is not anything that I've brought up today is not anything negatively directed towards Mr. Taylor. So that said, I am very much about the process. And so listening to the discussion prior to the vote for Mr. Taylor, where the majority of the committee was steadfast in the fact that the bylaws were crystal clear, and then listening to the discussion around the bylaws and the questions around them and whether we're following them right or not, like the irony there is very, very thick. So I would just encourage you all to kind of listen to the early part of the meeting. I know you've been a part of it, but then go listen to the second part and see the irony that is there. Ms. Stevens, you asked some really great questions, and I think you should continue to ask questions while you're on this board. You did hear two different things, and Mr. Sun, you referenced this as well. I promise you, I did not create a public statement without doing my research. Every budget committee position that has been filled since 2016 has also been posted, whether there was an incumbent position or an incumbent person or not, they have all been posted as well. So I think you guys need to get that figured out and clearly identify it in your bylaws. And then the last thing that I'll leave you with is just the can versus should, right? So can we look at our bylaws and think of them like this? Should we look at our bylaws and think of them like this? And so, I think as you move forward, making decisions for the budget, I think you really need to consider can versus should, because I think that there's a really big difference there. And I think we might have missed that. So I wish this committee nothing but good luck and good fortune. And I will be certainly watching along the way. I'm happy to be more freed up at work and looking forward to being an active public participant in the process. So thank you again for your time.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Burke.
Thank you, Ms.
Appreciate
Burke.
that. Any other public input this evening? Okay, hearing none. I do have to look at my phone because we did add a non-public section. I have to read certain language, so I have to read the phone for that. So bear with me. It's not common for the budget committee to do.
It's a first for me.
Yeah, so,
I don't have it memorized yet.
yeah, I don't have it memorized at all. So, so I move to enter a non-public section pursuant to RSA 91A3, 2A through C for the dismissal and or disciplining of an employee. That is, and I'll have to do a roll call vote. So to proceed with non-public, I'll do a roll call vote and I'll start with Ms. Harrison, please.
Yes.
Mr. Sun,
Yes.
Ms. Douglas.
Yes.
I am a yes. Mr. Barca,
Yes.
Mr. Hayes,
Yes.
Mr. Leary. Mr. Leary,
To get a coffee.
Ms. Stevens,
Yes.
yeah, so we'll go with 700. All right, we are now non-public. We will re-adjourn to come back out of non-public. We will likely do a vote in public session and then proceed with adjournment.
So do we make sure that,
Yep. So at this point,
Sorry,
all
Mr.
committee-
Mr. Chairman, I voted yes on going non-public. I'm sorry.
okay, thank you, thank you.
I said, this is a first for me, so.
So
Doesn't
if
matter
there's
how